Well, welcome everyone. Today's webinar we'll be talking about harnessing your stress. So stress is a complex phenomenon. It's influenced by many factors, and it's generally experienced differently by everyone. And absolutely everyone is experiencing stress, some level of stress in this difficult time. So this webinar will be providing some basic information about physiological stress response, and we'll then present some strategy for shifting mindset about stress so we can better manage stress. So, well, to begin this presentation, I'd like to point out this picture with this lion chasing the zebra. So we often think about stress as being the zebra, right? It's engaging its fight or flight response, trying to escape from the lion and trying to not get eaten alive. But however, the lion is also experiencing stress as it's under immense pressure to perform to avoid starvation. So today in this webinar, we'll be discussing how to expand our mindset about stress from being just a zebra to being the lion also. This is the roadmap we'll be going through today. We'll go through the classically defined new participant. We'll be going through the classic stress response, and we talk about how there are limitations to that definition, and we'll be discussing the alternative stress mindsets and how we can practice use some strategies for changing our mindset and for harnessing stress. All right, so what are the classically defined stress response? Well, usually I will ask the audience, but to them to give the answer. So it's usually what we refer to as fight or flight response. It's also called acute stress response. The idea is your body releases hormones and neurotransmitters like cortisol, and then cause activation of your sympathetic nervous system that leads to increased heart rate, increased metabolism, vasodilation, dilated pupil, all kinds of physiological response that we're familiar with. The reaction usually starts in the amygdala, and then there will be a cascade of chemical, biochemical, electrical events that activate your system. And amygdala specifically is an important brain area for emotional processing, especially for fear. So this classic way of understanding our response to stress has led to an understanding of this. Chronic stress is equal to toxic stress, right? That repeated exposure to cortisol makes brain more sensitive to cortisol, and it's a positive feedback loop, and it gets worse every time. So as a result, chronic stress is usually emphasized as something negative that takes a toll on your brain and body. Though the classic understanding of stress response is technically not wrong, it is also not entirely complete and fails to apply to the stress we experience in modern days. This model is largely based on results from experiments involving exposing mice to unexpected and uncontrollable stressors. But in fact, most of the stress we experience nowadays is not unexpected nor uncontrollable. So there must be a better way to understand stress. And the important point of this presentation is that thinking about stress is actually is part of the reason why it's so bad. The reason we advocate for a different alternative model for understanding stress, because the act of thinking stress is bad itself is unhealthy and it leads to undesired consequences. In fact, there is a study, there's the reference down below. there's a study done in 2012. It's a mega study, and it found that participants who experience high level of stress and believe it was bad for their health had 43% increased risk for premature death. And this is in comparison to those who experience also high level of stress, but did not believe it was quite bad. So this study just tells us how thinking about stress itself is bad, is not good for our health. And as a result, I'm going to be going through some alternative stress responses that expand our definition of stress response. So a good way to remember this, well, it's not here, is engage, connect, and grow. Those are the three important words: engage, connect, and grow. So the first thing is engage, right? So the first is knowing that stressors are a challenge, not a threat. Cortisol and adrenaline actually have positive effects. They focus your attention, heighten your senses, increase motivation, and mobilize energy to places where actually needed. This is when we go back to the lion. The lion is engaged in this stress response and is thinking, oh, I need to catch this zebra so I can eat it. And it's engaging, it's focusing its attention, its heightened senses, and it's mobilizing energy to the places we need it. And an example of this for us is, remember that upcoming exams is not going to crush you. It's an opportunity for you to crush the exam and show how much you've learned. Another way of thinking about this concept is the release of cortisol and adrenaline is not about the flight. It's not just about the flight, but it's also about the fight. This is the second point, is connect, engage, connect, and grow. Connect. So the second part of this is what we call Tenant befriend response. Oxytocin release activates, well, oxytocin is found to release during stress responses, and it activates pro-social instructions, encourages social connection, and enhance social connections as well. It also, in the same time, dampens our fear while increasing courage. This is what we usually call mama bear instinct. As a result, stress can present a wonderful opportunity to make new social connections. Of course, making new social connections during this period of isolation is very difficult. However, instead of isolating yourself socially and virtually because of the stressful situation, we should ride the surge of oxytocin and make or enforce some of the social connection that we have. And we can reach out to more people, to maybe a friend you haven't talked to for a while. This is a wonderful opportunity. And finally, there is the grow part. So what we call learn and grow response. There's a period of growth after the stressor is over. The post-stress recovery process restores nervous system balance and process and integrate the experience that we just had and helps brain grow and learn from the experience. It sets us up for a better response to the stressor next time. So this wonderful mechanism by your brain will be wasted and misused if you just ruminate too much after your stressful situation. And instead, we should try to think about all the things we learned from the experience, what things we did was helpful, what things we did needs to be improved. But, well, I have a disclaimer. We have to remember it is important to remember that stress is a normal part of life, and a life without stress is a life without meaning. So we're going to talk about why can't we just avoid stress if it's not pleasant. So a lot of stressors are not avoidable. you can't, like, for example, if you have an exam, you can just be like, hey, I don't want to take this. I'm going to avoid it by just not take it. Maybe that's possible, but it's not ideal in every situation. So we're going to try to teach different ways you can approach stress by shifting your mindset. Okay, let's talk about the real experiences. So we have 2 strategies for you today. The first one is called mindset shift. When you perceive a stressor as a threat, the strategy aims to transform it from a threat to a challenge. Let's say you're sitting down for an exam that's important for your grade. You pause before turning in the exam. You remember that this exam, turning over the exam before you start, you remember that this exam is your major area. It's an area of study you're passionate about. So we're going to think about strength. And then you acknowledge all the things you've done to prepare for the exam. All the late night studying, all the going to the office hour, all the review of your notes and homework. This is what we call preparation and past experience. And the last phase is finally you draw to mind that people that you know, people that you care about, that people who care about you, a parent, a mentor, a friend, what are things they would say if they knew you were stressed out? So this is the last phase. We think about the loved ones and all the support system we have. So this is a very helpful strategy for changing our mindset that, oh, a stressor is terrible, it's a threat, to making it a challenge. And the second strategy we'll be presenting today is called bigger than yourself goals. And we'll take a look at these questions. So it's when we're experiencing stress, if we're connected to something bigger and to connect to a profound meaning or purpose, we see it as being worth it. In other words, remember, I'm stressed out because I care and it matters to me. So some of the questions we ask are, what kind of positive impact do you want to have on the people around you? What mission in life or at Carleton most inspires you? What do you want to contribute to the world? And what change do you want to create? These are the example questions we encourage you to think about. And once you have a bigger than yourself goals or purpose, it's much easier to manage the stress it causes. So here's some final thoughts. Well, thank you for joining me, and I really appreciate you spending your precious leisure time on Zoom with me. I really hope you learned a thing or two from the webinar. An important takeaway from this presentation is stress is not necessarily all bad. A negative mindset towards stress is not going to help you manage it more effectively. And because avoiding stress is not always the best option or even possible. I wish by shifting your attitude and mindset towards stress would help you manage more effectively. Well, I believe there are no better time to practice some self-care strategies than right now in the current situation. We have almost complete control over our schedule and a lot of free time. Most importantly, the current situation introduces a lot of new stressors into our lives. So it's vital that we recognize them and try to manage them. The 2 practices we introduced in this webinar are a good place to start. I'll be taking any questions. You can just type in the chat. I will stop recording, by the way.